All right, I think we'll get started and then let folks trickle in. So good morning, good afternoon, some. We have a great great presentation today at BDC Presents. It's Beating the Heat, how local governments are addressing extreme heat. We have some awesome presenters from Los Angeles and Denver. Y'all are all in for a treat. Kirsten and Jan will be talking about what their local governments are doing. We're excited to kind of hear about all the awesome work they're doing to address extreme heat. So yeah, who is BDC? I think a lot of y'all have jumped on before, but for those of you that haven't, BDC, right, or the Building Decarbonization Coalition, we're a nonprofit coalition made up of utilities, manufacturers, design and construction, the design and construction community, local governments, NGOs, and a bunch of other organizations, as you all see, and individuals that are coming together to collectively seek to eliminate pollution from the built environment, and to work together to seek solutions to get rid of pollution ultimately, and make the built environment more healthy, more resilient, more affordable. We go on to the next slide. So yeah, a little bit about us beyond kind of our membership. In 2019, in an effort to fully outline how how to reach these goals and how to decarbonize the built environment, we created a roadmap. And in this roadmap, if you can go on to the next section, please. We have a couple of key goals, right? Among the goals, are to, Among these goals are to decarbonize new buildings, right, through a zero emissions building code. We also have our goals to decarbonize the building sector overall. You see on the screen, right, in our efforts to decarbonize both new buildings and existing buildings or retrofits, we have some high efficiency heat pump goals as well. And that I uplift that goal from our roadmap, because today we're going to be speaking about extreme heat, and we think there's a strong nexus between extreme heat and heat pump, right? Heat pumps are one way we can bring relief to communities that need it most, while also decarbonizing our buildings simultaneously, because they provide both heating and cooling. We can move on to the next slide. So from those goals, right, those overarching targets or goals, we have our roadmap goals, right? Essentially, what are we going to do, or what are we trying to do, right? We at BDC, we build customer, builder, contractor awareness, right? We want to build awareness. We want to educate folks about the issues. We're trying to bring diverse perspectives to the table, and we have some great folks here to talk about how they're approaching extreme heat, right? And of course, in connection to decarbonization. We also want to ensure that customers and others receive good value, right? We want to make sure that communities and others, think decarbonization is something that they want to do, not only because it's something that we can do to prevent climate change, but also because it benefits you, and it could benefit you economically, it could benefit you in different ways, it could benefit your health. We also want to ensure that we can provide those who are providing the goods, right? Builders and contractors and others, the value, right? So they can kind of keep their companies going, and they can kind of supply us with the needs and materials we need in order to be able to make the transition to decarbonize the built environment. And in that, we want to ensure that there's supply chains and that everyone working in the system to provide us with the appliances and different things we need in order to decarbonize the built environment, that they can provide us good quality products, and that we have a consistent and strong workforce. And last but not least, we want to align policy to meet our goals. So these are the 5 ways we approach kind of the roadmap. If we go on to the next slide. So in our series of extreme heat, right, we have a couple of speakers lined up. Next is extreme heat strategies for all. Our friends, APEN, will be speaking to us about resilient hubs and kind of their approach to extreme heat, and we're looking forward to that. As we've mentioned, today we have some awesome speakers from Los Angeles and Denver, and they'll give us their perspective, and next month we'll have folks on the front line talking about how they're thinking about extreme heat. Some quick logistics, so then we can get started. Everyone is muted. Please ask your questions via chat, and we will ask speakers to answer at the end of the remarks. This webinar is being recorded. Members of the coalition can access the recording on the website, so join if you haven't joined already. And if you're interested in hearing about a lot of our other great benefits, please reach out to us. And I think with that, we'll get started.
All right, good morning. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Kirsten Pawling, the County of Los Angeles. Thanks to BDC for hosting today. I'm excited to talk to you about extreme heat. There's a lot to talk about. So it says I am showing my screen, but my screen is just myself, I'm assuming. How do I close that there?
I can see your slides.
That looks right. Okay, great. Great. So I'm starting off with my most fun slide, which is a picture of the World Series hosted in Los Angeles in 2017. It was obviously in October. October is my favorite month to talk about heat, because I get to show this picture. This is an evening picture. This was a fateful day. The Dodgers ultimately lost this World Series for other reasons, but you might talk about the heat that contributed to that game. It was 103 degrees during this night game. So we're very much already dealing with the impacts of extreme heat here in Los Angeles. Why aren't my slides advancing? Here we are. So I'm going to just frame basically everything I talk about related to heat is right now we're very much in a partnership mode, because extreme heat, we're finding the impacts are so pervasive. It's just impacting so many aspects of how county does business and who the county will need to be serving and focusing on most directly. So that's my, if I want you to take anything away from it, is that local governments need partners to talk and learn about and be responsive to the dangers of extreme heat. So I start with another sports picture, I guess you could call it sport, of horse racing. So we started one of our early partnerships focusing on extreme heat. Our office, the Chief Sustainability Office, is really only, we're, I think on paper, just over 5 years old. But really, I've been on the team just over 4 years, and I was one of the first staff to be hired. So one of our early partnerships on this topic was with the Jet Propulsion Lab. One of the researchers there asked us to be one of the applied partners for this tool, a new satellite that could measure surface temperature at a very precise, much more fine scale than any other satellite had been able to do. So this is a picture of the LA basin, basically. I invite you to look closely at the scale on, I just want to make sure you can for sure see the scale. The top of the scale is 140 degrees. That's, I mean, 120 degrees is hot, right? Like 140 degrees is extremely hot. And you can see this little patch, these patches right there, that's our San Gabriel Valley. And one of those parking lots hit 147 degrees, and it was a Santa Anita racetrack parking lot. So that taught us, like, good Lord, it is very hot here already. But, you know, not a lot of people live at the Santa Anita racetrack. So we said, we really got to dig in here and see, like, what does this really mean for the vulnerable populations that the county sometimes, in a lot of ways, is the first one to serve. If we're thinking about people's health, and we run, you know, health facilities, public hospitals and such. So that led us to think about we also, we work on climate change. So how are these things going to be getting worse? My slides are not advancing. I'm trying to show you projections that we looked at to indicate how hot it would get in our communities. I really don't know how to make it go here. Enter, maybe that's doing it. I'm gonna try to keep going here. So the Antelope Valley, San Fernando Valley, San Gabriel Valleys, the research before we started some of our more in-depth projects was already showing that they're going to have 95 to 105 degree 95 to 155 days more per year where the temperature is extremely hot. If we're talking by 2080. So we said, wow, okay, that's really bad, but how do we get to some more actionable data for us? I'm just gonna maybe stop sharing my screen for a second and see if that maybe resets things. No, it does not. Oh, yes, it does. Great. And we'll start sharing my screen. Okay. So this is the information I was just sharing. We're going to start, the information that was out there already showed that by 2080, we're having very severe problems. But, we don't, as a local government, we aren't necessarily thinking every day about 2080. So we wanted to do some more in-depth work to see what we as a local government could do to address extreme heat. So we started working with the Southern California Resilience Initiative. And this new initiative was founded really after the wildfires that hit West Ventura, the Woolsey Fire. Because there was a need for real regional work, and this new initiative that Philanthropy kicked off really asked us to work across the region and to think and invited us to come up with our most important questions. And we said, our question, we know that heat is this big problem for us. How do we measure heat vulnerability? Like we said, we knew that data about parking lots, that's helpful, but what do we do with that? And how does it affect the people who we serve? So we asked for funding to do this study about how to define heat vulnerability specific to LA County, because there were so many methodologies out there that, and this is such an emerging space that we wanted some smarter people than us to sit down and look at all of them. So Columbia Center for Resilient Cities and Landscapes conducted this assessment and set of recommendations for how to measure heat vulnerability. Which I will get to why that was so helpful in a minute. Another set of partners that I wanted to identify was I sat on the climate insurance working group for the state of California. I was the only local government on that seat or on that body, which is a new body that is charged with identifying the ways that the insurance industry in the state can be part of thinking about climate resilience. So that body had to identify what are the new tools out there. And I was especially interested in making sure that the tools were reflective of the needs of local governments, especially on the public health implications of extreme heat. Because everybody wanted to talk about insurance because this was wildfire insurance. But we said, there kind of is a private market already, definitely needs some rethinking in light of climate change. But we're most worried from a public health perspective of extreme heat, because extreme heat kills more people than wildfires does by far. And that already happens now in this country. So I'll just briefly mention it, we can talk about it more in the Q&A, is that we explored what's called a parametric insurance model, where basically we'd say X metric or a parameter around heat is met. And so we're paying into this is an innovative tool. We haven't actually launched this. We're exploring whether a parameter like it is 95 degrees for 10 days in a row in a place where that's not normal, we would pay a premium, and then if that parameter is met, we would get an insurance payout to help us respond to the exacerbated needs that you see in these very extreme heat situations. And that could involve hypothetically helping us pay for new heat pumps or other kinds of building infrastructure that will help us keep places like our cooling centers functioning during extreme events. We've also, this is the last partner I'll mention right now, we've also joined the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance. So another new body that was launched in August of this year. A global platform, now has over 40 partners of the private sector, insurance industry also, nonprofits and global regions like ourselves to address the threats of extreme heat, especially again from the perspective of who are most vulnerable and how can we come up with new solutions to address the gaps, from governance to finance to health to warning systems about heat, all kinds of innovative works going on there. And we and other cities and counties around the globe are now part of this conversation. So those are the partners. I'm now going to shift to talking about our sustainability plan, which is called the Our County Sustainability Plan. Our Board of Supervisors adopted that in 2019. It's about a lot of different things. It's not just about heat. So I've identified 7 key actions that are specific to heat. So these are things that I think are pretty transferable to what other local governments could be doing in terms of defining heat action in their long-range planning. So here are 4 examples about developing minimum requirements for cooling centers. We heard a lot in our public engagement about our cooling centers are not great, not places you actually want to hang out in, or maybe they're not super accessible. About tailoring where our transit stops and improved our shading structures should be. Talking about tree and vegetation planning that's very rooted in community. And then thinking about walkability and changing some of our standards so that the pedestrian environment is tenable in a hotter Los Angeles. An urban forest management plan. We've received $1.5 million from the state to do an urban forest management plan. And that'll help us meet we have specific quantifiable targets about our urban tree canopy in the sustainability plan. And the climate vulnerability assessment, we have, this is the action that we prioritized. So we adopted the plan, and one of the first priorities was to take on what are actually 2 actions in the sustainability plan, which is to conduct a climate vulnerability assessment that addresses social vulnerability, and also one that addresses physical infrastructure vulnerabilities to climate change. We ended up doing those together, and we just released it. Is today Thursday? Yesterday. The days are sort of spilling together now. So I will talk about briefly. So again, this is just like setting the baseline, education for ourselves. Who's most vulnerable to climate change? And here is the map about extreme heat. The hot pink is basically the places where the exposure is getting worse, so where it's getting very hot, and who's most vulnerable to that heat. So you will see pink, throughout our northern parts of the county and our eastern parts of the county and southeastern parts of the county. So there's just some data there about examples of what types of communities those are. And like I said, we just came out with this yesterday, so we're getting some news coverage of it, and all of the articles so far are interested in the heat aspect. So I guess to summarize, where we're at right now is to inform ourselves and to inform our communities about the risks of heat. And I wouldn't say we have a comprehensive plan in place yet to tackle everything, but really there are so many avenues that you could go to address extreme heat. It's laying the information out there and getting tailored information and asking that question is who is most vulnerable and where. So when we have the solutions, we know where to start deploying them first and where to invest. I will stop there, and I have no idea how good I'm doing on time. But I cannot see the clock here.
That was great, Kristen. Thank you. Do we have Jan with us?
I hope so. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, great. So sorry about that. My IT firewall and GoToWebinar are not getting along today. But my name is Jan Keleher. I'm the Building Electrification Lead for the City and County of Denver, and really excited to present to you about Denver's extreme heat initiatives. My presentation is going to be very similar to Kristen's. It's going to include a lot of maps, some news clippings, and some ideas of what we want to work on in the future. And for the agenda, I really want to start with what's happening with the state of heat in Denver today, how might that change tomorrow, our current initiatives, and then some of the future initiatives we are working on now, laying the groundwork for today. Next slide, please. So regarding the state of heat in Denver today, I want to start by centering equity. What we see time and time again as we graph and display different metrics in Denver is the shape we call the inverted L. So the northern part of the city and the western part of the city are where we see the highest inequities. So whether that is poverty, vehicle access, lack of tree canopy, ambulatory disability, household isolation, asthma hospitalization rates, whatever it is, that inverted L continues to show up. And likely that is a pattern that's very similar in other cities, and we can trace this back to redlining practices in the 20s. These are the precise neighborhoods that were redlined back then, and still today are showing significant inequalities. Next slide, please. So as we sum all these different metrics, specifically lack of vehicle access, lack of tree canopy, lack of impervious surfaces, demographics, and percent of people with ambulatory disabilities, we have a heat vulnerability index, which is a composite index of all of those metrics. And again, we see that inverted L show up, and that's where already today we see some significant problems with extreme heat events and significant inequality. Next slide, please. In fact, Denver has one of the highest inequitable effects of heat islands. So our most affluent neighborhoods are up to 16 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than our least affluent neighborhoods. And again, we time and time again see that inverted L show up as an indicator of where we need to focus our efforts, our policies, and incentives. Next slide, please. As we talk about, what is the future of Denver's temperatures, it's already been shown to track significantly upwards from a 20th century average. And as we plan that out into the future, next slide, please, we see some significant impacts. So in the 1990s, there was only about 5 days a year that were over 95 degrees Fahrenheit and less than 1 over 100. And by 2040, we're predicted to have about 35 over 95 degrees Fahrenheit and 8 over 100 degrees. And if we continue on the same emissions trajectory we are on today. And a neighboring city, the city of Boulder, just received advice from their environmental board that they are likely to see 112 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of this decade. So for us, those are pretty extreme temperatures, especially compared to historical patterns. Next slide, please. I just love this graphic because it kind of shows us where we're headed by 2100. And so Denver will have the same climate as far southern Texas. So very different than what residents have experienced here in the past decades. Next slide, please. One of the challenges with the discrepancy between historical temperature averages and temperature extremes and future or current even is that 30% of Denver homes do not have air conditioning. And so a lot of homes are able to cool by opening windows overnight when it is cool outside, and then rely on that thermal capacity to maintain a reasonable temperature during the day. That's actually what I do, and it served me well last summer. But this summer we had a record-setting summer, and it was a struggle not to have air conditioning. Last summer, the challenge, like for many California communities, was outdoor air quality. We had local Colorado wildfires, as well as wildfire smoke from more regional wildfires in other southwestern and western states. And so opening windows overnight was in some cases enough to set off a fire alarm. So many residents had to choose between whole home cooling and good indoor air quality, and couldn't have both in many cases. We're likely to see this percentage be even higher for some of our most under-resourced neighborhoods. Our utility, Xcel Energy, which serves a number of different regions in Colorado, estimates that around 50% of their single-family homes do not have air conditioning. And that is partially driven because they also serve some of our mountain climates where temperatures have been even cooler than Denver's historically. Next slide, please. I also want to just cover a few different types of technologies that we see here. We see swamp coolers, and I actually come from the Northeast, so this is the first time I've seen them. They generally work better with lower relative humidity, so actually even better in New Mexico, maybe Arizona. But as we see more and more climate extremes here in Denver, at our relative humidity around 30–35%, we're likely to see really high supply air temperatures. So swamp coolers are really not going to be doing the job that we expect them to do, and keeping us cool. In addition, other technologies, say like window air conditioners, might also be under conditioning spaces down the road, even if they're providing adequate cooling today. Next slide, please. Now I'll move on to our current initiatives. So our strongest initiative today for heat resiliency is a green building ordinance. And this was actually born out of a citizen-led effort for a green roof ordinance, which had some challenges, legal, etc. But we're very proud to work with that group and assemble a task force that helped us figure out what are reasonable and legal compliance options for green buildings. And what we ended up with is all new buildings over 25,000 square feet, as well as all existing buildings over 25,000 square feet that are replacing their roof, must install a cool roof and one of the additional compliance options in their category. So this means that anytime a new building is going up over 25,000 square feet, it has a cool roof, and existing buildings, as they're replacing their roofs, they are also installing a cool roof. And we see that generally happen after a large hail event. So we actually haven't had that many since the beginning of this ordinance, but we are probably due for one, and we'll see a lot more cool roofs required, or installed rather. And already I think around 70% of Denver's buildings have cool roofs installed. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is just another overview of the ordinance. It applies to new buildings, existing buildings. The most common application, the most common sort of package that existing buildings go through is the cool roof package, along with the energy program. So usually they're implementing energy efficiency measures as well, so further decreasing their greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. I'll also cover briefly what's in our new building code. So we are maybe fortunate in that we are a home rule municipality, so we can write all our own building codes. So currently what we have in our Denver Green Code, which is kind of our stretch code, but the intent is to bring that into base code the following code cycle, is that for at least 50% of sites hardscapes, we have existing trees and vegetation or new native plants and adaptive plants required. SRI 29 requirements for paving materials, some permeable pavers, porous pavers, and shading through structures. And some of the proposals we're currently looking at, next slide please, for our Denver Green Code are requiring street trees and right-of-ways, tree preservation requirements, rock mulch allowances, wall shading, and single-family lot coverage requirements. So we are just embarking on our next code update process. It'll be the 2022 codes, but we are already seeing a number of different proposals for additional heat mitigation strategies, one of which is electrification of buildings. And that is definitely my area of expertise within the city. And so as we talk about building electrification in Denver, we're able to talk about both strategies for new buildings and existing buildings. And so all new building strategies fall into our Denver code process. And we've received a number of staff and community proposals for full or partial electrification of different building types. So we'll be excited to see what happens in 2022 regarding how new buildings are built in Denver going forward. Next slide, please. And then I'm happy to cover our existing building electrification strategy. As mentioned, we see heat pumps as a huge, I'd say, component of climate resiliency as well as climate action in Denver. So currently, our commercial, multifamily, and single-family homes make up well over half of our city's emissions, and our grid is decarbonizing very quickly. Here in Colorado and locally, Xcel Energy have committed to around 80% renewables by 2030. So we are seeing huge leaps and bounds in the decrease of the carbon intensity of the grid, while there aren't, to date, great proposals for the decarbonization of the pipeline mix. Therefore, we see building electrification as the best strategy to decarbonize our heating emissions. In June, we published the Energized Denver Renewable Heating and Cooling Plan. We engaged over 300 stakeholders. There's a lot of phone calls with low and medium income families to understand their concerns and opportunities and understanding of this space, as well as subject matter experts. The plan included techno-economic analysis. So that was an analysis of what are the most common building types in Denver, what are the most common building heating systems, cooling systems, and ventilation system types. And then we worked with a professional estimator to get actual quotes from converting those system types in our buildings, as well as looking at bill impacts. So for better or worse, here in Colorado, we have the third lowest gas rates, I should say historically. Who knows what will happen in the future, but we have the third lowest gas rates in the country. And so electrification can have challenges around economics. But with that being said, we found a lot of opportunities. One, I would say, in small and medium commercial spaces based on rate structures, and then second, in with partial electrification. So opportunities where we're deploying a heat pump that can serve cooling, as well as 75 to 80% of the heating needs of a building or home, and the rest can be served through either the existing fossil fuel system or a new fossil fuel system in the form of a hybrid or dual fuel heat pump. And that's just due to Denver's colder climate. Our design temperature is around 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and we regularly see -5, -10 Fahrenheit in the winters. So apart from all the benefits of heat pumps, which are obviously decarbonizing heating emissions, that's the biggest reason we're talking about them. Improved indoor air quality. Second, we also have the addition of cooling to a space. And next slide, please. This is sort of a similarity to Kirsten's slides. We released our Energized Denver Renewable Heating and Cooling Plan in the middle of a heat wave in June, which is very uncharacteristic for us. So you can see that a lot of the news and reporters and journalists were quite interested in, I think, that the cooling options that heat pump deployment can provide. So a tremendous opportunity we're trying to capture, as not only do we know 30% of Denver's homes lack air conditioning, but many are using swamp coolers or say window air conditioners that are likely to be inadequate in the future. And so we see heat pumps as an opportunity to, say, provide cooling to a tenant. Heating is required by law, but cooling is not. But if that system were to be a heat pump anyway, inherently, that tenant would have access to cooling in their space as well. Next slide, please. One last thing I'll just cover, a bit of a food for thought. One of the aspects of the Energize Denver Renewable Heating and Cooling Plan was a grid analysis we conducted. So we worked very closely with our local energy provider, Excel Energy. They actually serve electricity, natural gas, and steam to Denver buildings and homes. And we worked with them. They provided some anonymized, aggregated, hourly electricity data, as well as data for gas and steam use in Denver. And we wanted to understand, okay, what are the grid impacts of electrifying our heating needs? And I don't know how much of a conversation this is in say California, but in Denver, it's a significant conversation because we have such low temperatures that we have to design for. So what we found in our analysis is we actually have very significant headroom between the current winter peak and the current summer peak. And so, we could electrify around 50% of buildings with sort of minimal efficient available cold climate air source heat pump. Those are the bars on the very right of either graph. And at that point in time, the winter peak is likely to look like the summer peak. But we also investigated other scenarios. For example, looking at higher efficiency cold climate air source heat pumps, combining cold climate air source heat pumps with shell improvements. The 50% hybrid model represents what if we utilize gas as a supplemental heating system, 2 heat pumps in 50% of buildings and 50% of homes. And then the balanced approach represents kind of a mix of approaches, some weatherization, shell improvements, some gas backup, some high and some low efficiency cold climate air source heat pumps. All that to say, overall the findings are really promising for our building electrification strategy. Right now we're pursuing heavily a partial electrification strategy through permitting practices and through a potential for a building performance policy. But one of the shortcomings, I think, of our grid analysis in this context is we didn't look at potential impacts to the summer peak. One thing we did look at was incremental EV charging load by 2030, based on Excel Energy's ambitious but really great transportation electrification plan. Denver would see something like 70,000 electric vehicles on the road, or in Denver, sorry, by 2030. But we didn't really look at what happens when those remaining 30% of Denver homes do get air conditioning, whether that's a swamp cooler, a window air conditioner, central heating, or a heat pump, ideally. How does that impact the summer peak, which is, we know where they currently are the biggest grid constraints, and what does that do to provide additional headroom for the winter peak and buy us a little bit more of a runway where maybe we're able to reach 70, 80%, even 90% building electrification, and eventually have a grid where the summer and winter peak look rather similar. And with that, I'm happy to hand it over back to Ashley. Thanks.
Thank you, Jan and Kristen, for those awesome presentations. At this moment, we'll switch over to Q&A. So folks, feel free to ask your questions and we'll do our best to get to all of them. Folks have already asked a couple, so I'll go ahead and get started and go through them. From Gerard, there's a question about kitchen electrification, right? And I think the question is, are there any discussions about converting kitchens in your counties to all electric? OSHA is looking into enacting regulations to tackle this problem. Are there any discussions at the city, county level to tackle this problem? Who wants to go for that? Who wants to answer that question?
I can start. Sorry, I cannot see you guys, but here we go. We haven't, we don't have a person like Jan who's like our building electrification lead yet. I think Denver is definitely further ahead in the conversations. We are right now where we are at is about doing sort of a efficiency for energy and water, basically assessment of where everybody is and reporting requirement. And you know, we'll certainly be looking closely at the types of facilities that have, you know, kitchens, and that's a big part of their energy use. And we have, you know, thinking about it sort of from the people side and health side, you know, we have heard about the you know, difficult conditions that people who work in kitchens face, especially in the summer months. So and that's, I think, a part of the conversation that, especially on sort of the labor side of all the building decarbonization work, that we're pretty interested in advancing the conversations. And you know, it's a slightly less organized labor than other aspects of folks who are labor who's interested in building decarbonization. So I'd say that we've baby stepped into that space, but don't have a lot of copy paste solutions to present.
Thank you, Kristen. And Jan, wondering if you wanted to take on that question as well.
Sure. You know, my audio dropped out. I think it was around converting commercial kitchens.
Yeah, essentially, yeah, I'd say that's pretty much it, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have any initiatives underway, but you know, through our extensive stakeholder outreach, we know that that's a challenge, but also opportunity. Kristen mentioned there's so many benefits to electrifying kitchens, and you know, we've seen case studies, I think, from New York and other places where potentially, you know, kitchens were maybe forced to electrify based on like gas availability or things like that, and all the benefits that came from that, you know, just having a cooler kitchen, better indoor air quality in the kitchen, is something we want to cover. And you know, a couple of the opportunities that I think I didn't really cover well for Denver is we have a climate protection fund, which is a 0.25% sales tax on non-essential goods that amounts to up to $40 million a year that our office can spend on initiatives. And one of the first things we're looking at is I think a swath of demonstration and pilot projects. So we really want to have I think a library of case studies of electrifying different.
I think we're having audio problems. Yeah.
Different types of technologies in Denver, in different types of buildings, and part of that would definitely be commercial kitchens.
Lost some of what you said there, Jan, but it sounds like you have some money and potentially with kitchens.
Yeah, you're coming in and out, Jan. Sorry about that, but I think we caught some of it. I'll check in with Ashley and Lawrence to see if we can make sure that the next question, the audio is a little bit better. I'll move on to another question for now. Appreciate everyone's patience. Do interest in heat mitigation, decarbonization, and fire resilient construction support each other or conflict? What are your thoughts, Kristen or Jan?
You know, it's usually the wildfire resilience and decarbonization as a, you know, butting of heads here in LA. The heat piece, I honestly think the conversation is so early that a lot of people haven't linked all of them together, whether that's you know, whether they're working in sync or against each other in folks' minds. I don't think enough people are actually piecing those three things together right now. I think that there's a lot of, I'll even say within the county, right? Like I mentioned cooling centers. There's a lot of, that's what we do right now. I think there's a lot of governance thinking that needs to be done to say cooling centers aren't going to be the end all be all, right? We know that moving people to a place during like a heat emergency, basically, that's difficult. Are there other solutions, that can be part of the conversation then, and how do they support the other pieces, wildfire resilience and building electrification? I think you're like ahead of the curve here. I don't think most people have even pieced all those together.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony, for that question. Jan, how's your sound? Do you want to try to answer that question, if you'd like? Jan?
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry for the audio problems. Yeah, I think like Kirsten said, the question from Anthony is a little bit ahead of our curve as well. I think there's a lot of opportunity in areas like new building codes to cover all of the above, for example, and increase decarbonization, opportunities for heat mitigation and fire resilience all at once.
Oh, sorry, just to add one point to that. I think that's where having some more specific data helps. So the climate vulnerability assessment that we just put out, the communities are actually very different that have wildfire vulnerability versus heat vulnerability. So surprisingly, in most cases, LA is so diverse that there are definitely places where they overlap. So I think it is sitting down and having more community-specific conversations. I'll point out the Santa Clarita Valley. So Santa Clarita Valley is a big place. The city of Santa Clarita is our third largest city in LA. And that is a place where you see the overlap. But in most cases, it's logical to separate the wildfire resilience conversation from the heat resilience conversation, because they're very different communities for the most part in terms of vulnerability. Not in terms of exposure, it's probably more overlap, but if you're thinking about who's vulnerable, it starts to separate out those.
Yeah, thank you both for that answer, and thank you for that question, Anthony. Yeah, I think just really quickly, I think in terms of solutions, at least that some of the folks, I think some of our members at BDC have thought about it as, for example, a heat pump, right? The potential heat relief, the ability to decarbonize, right? And the air filtration systems for some of the more higher efficient models, I think are important, right? And that could be one way to tackle all three, but obviously defer to Kirsten and John on how the cities are approaching that and the difficult questions on that they're taking on. So appreciate that. And then there's another question over here. And this one is, in your grid analysis, did you include water heating and electrification impacts? I think this one might be for Jan, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, sure. Happy to take that on. Correct. It included water and spacing and electrification. I believe actually cooking electrification as well in the residential space. So we looked at all the end uses, but in our cold climate, 97% of gas use in homes is for space and water heating, for example. Where we do see the winter peak happen in our models is the morning startup for commercial buildings. So if you have an unoccupied set point at night and continue to do that, and then you have to heat the building back up to occupied levels, generally heat pumps are not great at that high temperature lift quickly. So that's where we see, electric resistance potentially being employed to do that. But with that being said, there's opportunities for changing setbacks as well as optimum start. But yes, we looked at water heating as well, and really huge opportunity in water heating grid impact mitigation. In fact, we're looking at proposals now to start to require grid flexibility in water heating equipment in going into new buildings, so long as it's electric, and likely something similar for existing buildings through our permitting process. And we see increased incentives from our local utility for that capability. So huge opportunity there to shift demand for water heating.
Thank you. And I think a follow-up to that from, I believe, Ivana, is how do you respond to concerns about grid reliability when we're talking about electrification? And I think for both of you, but maybe Jan, if you want to take it on.
Yeah, sure, I can take that. There's definitely a lot of misinformation out there. I'll just start with that. And that's really, I think, one of the drivers of why we did this grid analysis and worked so closely in tandem with our energy provider, Xcel Energy. We sort of now have the data to back up that our set of strategies for essentially what is partial electrification is not going to cause a winter peaking system, almost anytime. As strategies shift and we're looking at full electrification and technology improvements, we can, figure out what is the right set of technologies to maybe mitigate winter peaks. But all that being said, I think we're still underestimating growth to the summer peak, growth of electric vehicle demand, and things like that have been historically, and I think especially over the short term, 1 to 2 decades, are going to be the biggest drivers of grid impacts and local distribution grid upgrades.
Yeah, I can add to that too. That we talk about sort of grid investments in general as we were going to need to make them anyways, regardless of whether we were having a decarbonization conversation or not, right? Like our system in general needs investment, and we've underinvested in general. So that's one piece. We're also thinking about the flip side is our infrastructure for gas. Is that up to snuff too, right? We've seen some pretty, California we're tied, I think, with West Virginia for the oldest age of our gas infrastructure on average, like 40 something years, almost 50 years is the average age of our infrastructure. So we are part of a study with the RAND Corporation funded by the California Energy Commission about decommissioning of gas infrastructure, and just from a technical perspective, what does that entail? So you're comparing up, it's a even comparison to say when we're talking about our electricity grid, we also have a infrastructure system that delivers gas, and our both of them need investment, and which one's the smarter investment right now. So especially if you loop in, our climate goals. So that's our, we're trying to have some quantitative answers to both of those questions.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we have a question from Bruce. You mentioned a tax on non-essential goods to support pilots. Is that a sales tax? And what items are exempt, and have those funds changed the picture for climate mitigation programs?
Yeah, I forget the exact goods that are exempt. I think it's, like water, food, sanitary products, and things in that category. The second question is, has that changed? I'm sorry, can you repeat the second part, Jose?
Yeah, is that a sales tax, and what items are exempt, and have those funds changed the picture for climate mitigation programs?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, $40 million is not a lot of money, and is a lot of money. It is double Xcel Energy's statewide gas demand side management program funds. So we know it's a significant amount of money we can leverage. With that being said, we're trying to be very, I think, thoughtful and innovative about how we spend that. And in fact, one of the requirements for the fund, given that the sales tax is a bit of a regressive strategy, is to spend 50% of those funds in under-resourced neighborhoods. So that inverted L I spent some time talking about, that's where we're likely to see a lot of the investments, but also buildings and homes outside that inverted L. We're working with providers of services to people experiencing homelessness, people who have experienced homelessness, affordable housing throughout the city, for opportunities for decarbonization, and really see sort of these funds as critical in also supporting some of our policies and enabling them and de-risking them for some of our stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you. And I see a hand up from Chico. We're going to try to unmute you. See you. Go ahead. I think you're unmuted. Go ahead and ask your question. And sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Is it Chico?
Sorry, no, I did not have a question.
Okay. No worries. And we're coming up to 11. So someone asked, can you provide email contact information? Would that be okay with you all?
Sure.
Yeah, of course.
So Ashley, is that something that they should read out loud, or we'll send it after? What's easier?
We can send it in the follow-up email. That's probably the easiest.
Okay. Well, then I think we're coming up to the hour. So I want to thank everyone for jumping on and kind of having the discussion with us. Thank you so much again, Kristen and Jan, for sharing your plans, sharing your thoughts, sharing kind of details about your communities and how you're tackling such a serious issue. We're glad that we're having a series on this issue. We want to connect decarbonization, of course, to the climate crisis, but also connecting it to things like extreme heat are important to us because we want to provide relief as well to those communities in need. So hearing about how you're approaching the problem, I think, has been super informative, super exciting. Any closing thoughts from either of you before we close out?
I just wanted to say thanks for highlighting the issue. I think it's under discussed, and like you said, Jose, I think we need to take on mitigation and resilience at the same time. There's just not enough money out there, or maybe there is, but it's not in our hands yet. So appreciate BDC's amplifying the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Would echo that. Definitely a topic that needs more discussion, and we're likely, I think, to see more chief heat officers throughout the country to really lead at executive level on a lot of this work.
Thank you all, and thank you all for listening, and have a good morning and afternoon. Bye, y'all.